Hello, I'm George Kэйrnzom, and I'll be guiding you through Teach Yourself Photoshop, a complete course to help you master the art of image editing. Lesson 4 of your course is entitled Using Layers, Get Creative, and in the following 6 video tutorials, we'll look at several ways to get creative using image layers, adjustment layers, and even layer masks, so you can get to grips with these essential Photoshop tools. So in part 1 of our lesson, I'm going to work through a small creative project to introduce layers and layer types to you, and we'll kick off by opening this start image. It's called Part 1 Before. Now I've clicked Reset Panels to put Photoshop back into its default factory layout state, and that means that we can see the Layers palette down in the bottom right. Now this is a crucial area. This is what we're going to be working with a lot, so I'm going to just drag the Layers palette out now so it's floating over my main image. I don't need these other windows open at the moment, so what I'm going to do is close the panel bin on the right, and I'm going to close the project bin at the bottom, and then we can get a better look at our image. And then if I grab the zoom tool, I can then right click on the image and choose fit on screen, and we've got a leaner, cleaner interface that will give us a much better look at the layers palette and help us work through it more effectively. Now you can see here in the layers palette we've got a locked background layer. We know it's locked because there's a little padlock icon. So to unlock the layer and to make it editable, we can just double click on it like so, and up pops a new layer window. And this window here allows us to label the layer if we like. It's always good practice if you've got loads of layers. You can call them something a little bit more sensible than layer 0, layer 1 and so on. But I'm going to leave it at the moment at the default layer 0. There are other options like changing the blending mode and the opacity, but don't worry about those because you can change them in the layers palette later. So all you need to do here is just click OK, and it becomes an unlocked layer. The padlock icon has gone, and it's now called layer 0. Now you can see the little eye icon next to it. That indicates visibility. Thank you very much to the pop-up. And if you turn the eye off by clicking, you can see the transparent background. Any transparent area in a layer is indicated by these little checkerboards here. So I'm going to turn that back on to show you this layer here. And this layer is basically an image layer. There are other types of layers, as you'll see as we work through these tutorials, but the image layer is the most common layer, and you can have as many of these as you like stacked on top of each other, and they can blend together and mix together to create all sorts of different types of images. And what we're going to do in this tutorial is we're going to remove the boring grey background and replace it with another layer, and we're going to tint that layer to make it a little bit more interesting and complement the colours in this foreground flower. So let's kick off by going to the Tools palette and clicking here to select the magic wand. Set it to a tolerance of around about 39 and tick contiguous so it only samples pixels that are connected to the first area that you click on. Then if you click, it will create a selection like this. It may miss certain bits out because it's not an even grey background, so if we shift click, we can add more pixels to the selection. And you get these marching ants moving around the edge of the flower. And also there's a little bit of grey in here that I've missed, so shift click in there. There we go. So our marching ants are indicating the area that we've selected, which is the grey background. We can then choose Edit Cut to remove the background but preserve the flower. And you can see here we've got a transparent section now, and we've got an image as well on our image layer. Now it's a bit of a sharp selection, so I'm just going to undo that for the moment. Undo Cut Pixels, and then I'm just going to, since we've still got the magic wand selected, if I right click in the selection, I can get a pop-up menu, and if I choose Feather, I can then type in a value of something a little bit softer, like 2 or even 3 pixels. Let's stick with 2, click OK, and we've softened that selection now, so if I now go to Edit Cut, it should look a little less sharp and jagged, and now it's a little bit softer and more natural looking. Now we can pop up to the Layers palette, and we can click here to create a new layer. Click like so, and we now have 2 layers, layer 0 and layer 1. I'm just going to drag layer 1 behind layer 0 like so, and just click here to make sure that we've got layer 1 selected. So we now have 2 layers, flower on the top layer and a background, and we can fill this with any colour we like. I'm going to go for grey again to start with, and I'll show you a way to adjust it to create any colour you like at any time. Let's go to Edit, Fill Layer, and let's choose 50% grey from this drop down menu. Click OK. You can see from the thumbnail this is totally grey now on that layer, and we've got the flower on the layer at the top. And now if we go to Create New Fill or Adjustment Layer, we can choose Hue Saturation. Up pops a Hue Saturation Adjustment Layer. If we tick Colorize, we can then slide the hue and change that grey into any colour that we fancy. So I'm going to go for a colour that complements the flower, somewhere around about here, maybe around about 233 will give us a nice blue background to go with the flowers, purples, greens and yellows. And the cool thing about this adjustment layer is you can turn it on and off. It's non-destructive. You can place it above other flowers to change their colours as well. But let's pop it below layer 0, so it's just changing the grey layer 1. So adjustment layers do so many different things. We're just touching the tip of the iceberg here, but it's good to see that you can then come back to the adjustment layer anytime and change the colour to something else, and it's not altering the flower in any way. So again, around about maybe a more purpley background of 248 actually suits the purples in the flower more effectively. Now the cool thing about the adjustment layer palette, the hue saturation palette we've got here, is it's dockable. We can drag layers up here, drag adjustments by the scruff of the neck, and just pop it underneath the layers palette. You get a blue line, and they've docked together. So you can then go to Window and hide the panel bin again, and we now have a much tidier looking window. So I can drag these around anywhere I like, and we can see the adjustment layer or the image layer depending on what we click on. So there's no adjustment there at the moment because we're on an image layer, but if you click on the adjustment layer you get its relevant controls back up again, so you can tweak it anytime you like. And that's the power of adjustment layers. They allow you to change colours and tones at any time. I'm just going to drag my layers palettes out of the way for the moment so we can see the image as a whole, and what I'm going to do is grab the crop tool, hold the shift key to constrain a nice square crop, and let's get rid of some of the edges around the flower so that we've got a better composition. Something like that should do the trick. Drag in the middle of the crop tool, and when you're happy that it's fairly central, hit return or click the tick down here to apply the crop. I can bring my layers palette back in again. Adjustments is already docked, so that's floating with it. And what I'm going to do now is just target the background layer, layer 1. I'm going to grab a tool like the burn tool, set the range to shadows, exposure to 20%, and choose a nice large brush tip. I can use the right square bracket actually to create it even larger, about 1200 pixels. Just click and spray just to darken some of the corners there of the brush, and that adds a bit of texture and variety to the background. It makes it less bland and less even, and that just helps us make it a little bit more interesting. But because we're on that layer there, we're not changing the flower at all. We're just changing the background to add a little bit more of an interest there and a bit more variety to that rather bland computer generated background that we'd started with. So that's a cool thing. You can edit each layer just by clicking on its thumbnail and using a tool from the tools palette, and the other layers are left untouched. I can now target the top layer by clicking on its thumbnail. You can see it's changing color now. That's the darker section. And if I then grab the zoom tool and zoom in, we can see that the edge of the stem is a little bit rough and ready because of the way we selected it. It's eaten into the edge of the flower a little bit. So I can tidy that up by using the eraser. And because we're targeting the top layer, using a nice soft brush, maybe something like this one will do the trick. There's a size of 19, it's quite solid as well. And then if I just click here, hold the shift key, I can draw the eraser in straight lines between each point, and that is a cool way of just tidying up the edge of the stem and getting rid of those sharp edges. So keep on drawing. You could do this freehand as well, but the shift option helps you draw nice straight lines. There we go. I'll grab the zoom tool, right click and choose fit on screen. And that's the great thing about layers. You can target and change particular details on a layer without changing the content of other layers in the layers palette. So to sum up, we have image layers like the flower and the grey background, and we have adjustment layers which change things like colours or tones. And you'll notice the adjustment layer has a white square by it, and that is a mask, a layer mask. And we're going to look at those later on. But if you've got an adjustment layer with a mask, in theory you can click on a brush tool, choose a black brush, and if you click and spray on the mask, I'm just using the right square bracket to get a larger brush tip, you can create black on the mask, which stops that part of the adjustment layer from making changes to the layer below. So it's now going back to its original grey. And if this was a tonal changing adjustment layer, you could change the way it was adjusting tones instead of colours. But I'm just going to Control Z to undo that for the moment because I don't want to go too far into masks at this stage, but I want you to be aware that they exist because they're very powerful ways of fine-tuning the way a layer or an adjustment layer behaves. Okay, that's a very basic introduction to layers, and we'll come to grips with layers as we work through these other video projects in this lesson, and we're going to move on to add a border to an image using image layers in part 2, so see you then.